What's up, guys? Your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson here, and you might notice this recording sounds different than the usual podcast, and that is because I'm sitting outside here in Lockhart, Texas, recording this ad into my iPhone. It probably sounds pretty crappy. Well, I'm doing this to show you something very cool. Many of you guys know that my production team works over at Podsworth Media, and they've been producing my show for quite a while. I get a lot of questions and people asking, who does your podcast? Why does it sound great? And I'm telling you why. It's because the guys at Podsworth are amazing. They've got this brand new online app for taking rough recordings like this and making them a whole lot cleaner and more listenable with just a few easy clicks. It will remove background noise. It reduces plosives, it fixes clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, which I can promise you I've done many times, and they fixed this for me. It removes clicks and pops. And then also levels out the dialogue, so there's no crazy where the guest sounds too loud or the interviewer sounds too quiet. Here's what you guys can do. All of y'all that are interested in recording podcasts or audiobooks or anything, if you're a pastor and you want your sermon recorded, whatever the case may be, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You drag and drop your audio files or click to open your file manager. This also works on your smartphone's web browser. You customize your settings that you want, but the default works fine on most podcast recordings. Then enter code BUCK50. BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You don't need an account, just an email address and payment. And you'll get a download link in your email for your cleaned up files. How cool is this? The guys at Podsworth run everything they do through this app before they do anything else to it. So all of my recordings go through this app that we're talking about. It works great. Like I said, any spoken word recordings, obviously for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, whatever, it will make awful recordings sound listenable and much more professional. So, like I said, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. Let's get it.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson. And if you're watching this, as they always do, weekly, drop live on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Central. Happy Tuesday evening, and I hope you enjoy this. Let's chat it up in the live chat. And just so you guys know, that does happen every Tuesday night. These drop on the YouTube page at 7 p.m. And it's a live premiere setting, which means I get to chat with you as we watch this. And if you're not viewing or listening that way, I hope this finds you well wherever you are. I've got my buddies on the show. Most of you will know them from their podcasts. Matt Erickson, host of the Kingpilled podcast, and my friend Adam Patrick from the Age of Information. I got them on here for a few reasons. One is because we've had remarkably similar journeys, and those of you that have followed each of us along the way, it has been quite similar. So there might be some commonalities between all three of us and the people listening. But it's also because those of you that listen to The Age of Information with Adam Patrick, you know that actually Matt and I were both part of this series he's been doing, reading Father John Strickland's The Age of Paradise, Part 1, Christendom from Pentecost to the First Millennium. It's a 4-part series, and broadly the series is called Paradise and Utopia, The Rise and Fall of What the West Once Was. Well, Part 4 of this series is The Age of Nihilism, Christendom from the Great War to the Culture Wars. And that ties into what Matt's been doing on Kingpilled. And He's been reading a series of Father Seraphim Rose's books, who I call Saint Seraphim Rose. One of those books is Nihilism, which ties into, like I just said, part 4 of the series that Father John Strickland's doing. I say all of this because I wanted this to be kind of a layman's perspective, a primer to what I'm doing next week. Next week, I do have Father John Strickland himself on the show, and we're going to get into deep discussions on what his series is about. Again, the first part was Christendom from Pentecost to the first millennium. He's got 2 parts in between, and then he ends it again with Christendom from the Great War to the Culture Wars. And so since Matt, Adam, and myself have been kind of diving into these books as well, I thought it would be neat to get our perspectives, really not mine so much, but theirs, on some of these topics. It kind of details also, not the book necessarily, the book series, but we will detail parts of our journey along this way and relate it to some of the things we find in these books, including, as you learn new information, like Adam says on his Age of Information show, and reorienting your worldview and kind of where you're headed as new information comes in, because people hundreds of years ago didn't have access to all of the information that we have now. So part of our journey has been trying to figure out this search for truth and what is a cohesive worldview, definition of human nature, Christ's nature, and the like. And these guys are so good, so articulate, so well-read, and I know most of my audience loves hearing from them. So, real quick, I haven't got confirmation yet, but I am working on a super special guest for our monthly Zoom call. I think I will be able to do this. It's someone that you guys who take part in these Zoom sessions always request me to get. That probably gives you a big hint. And I'm going to try to do it ASAP in the next week or two. To get into that club, it's patreon.com/counterflow. And you just donate $5 or more per month, and you get in this club. When we have these Zoom sessions, I just send you the link. It's usually about 7 p.m. Central Time. They last about an hour. It's usually an hour with the guest, and then it turns out that we kind of talk for an hour amongst ourselves after the guest leaves, and it really has become like a little family, a great community. Man, everyone in that Zoom is much wiser than I am, so it's really me learning from you guys. So if you've not done that yet, I do suggest it. It's a lot of fun. And let's get to my friends right now, Matt Erickson from the Kingpilled podcast and Adam Patrick from the Age of Information. How are you guys?
Going on, Buck?
Doing good.
Good.
What's up?
Sometimes it feels silly to have the people that come on here give intros, but I don't want to be presumptuous and assume that all 3 of our shows have the exact same audience, although I know there's got to be like 95% crossover. So for those who aren't aware, they're going to be very aware of your shows, because we're going to go over that too in a second, but we'll just do a brief intro for each of you. And as I'm looking at the screen, deciding who do I want to pick, who do I like more, Adam starts with an A, Matt starts with an M. Adam, you go first.
So Adam Patrick, host of The Age of Information, Orthodoxy, and the Modern World, previous host of You're Talking Over Me, which was kind of the exploration of the COOF nonsense the last couple of years back in 2020, and talking a lot about how coming out of the libertarian ethos, what we were seeing, and if that mentality, if that ethos could work in a post-COOF world. And eventually, as we all did, stumbled onto Orthodox Christianity, which filled for me a lot of gaps and holes in the puzzle that I had been trying to work out for about 20, 25 years. Started exploring that, and then changed the show to explore a little bit about theology, philosophy, and geopolitics, and kind of combine those. And not a very novel approach to that, but maybe do it in a way that is a little bit less provocative than some of the bigger names that are doing it, and have try to get deep into philosophical and theological questions, and then not completely forget that the real world is going on. So that's what I'm doing now, and yeah.
Excellent. There's a lot I want to ask you just in regards to what you just said, but Matt, I'll let you go now.
Matt Erickson from Kingpilled. It started out as kind of a, libertarian politics, dissident right-wing sort of politics show, and then gradually morphed into really much more focused on Orthodox Christianity, and then particularly I don't know, history, anthropology, economics, philosophy, psychology, just kind of whatever happens to be floating my boat at the moment. Done a couple of interesting live reading shows lately where I was reading through some books by Father Seraphim Rose. So if you're interested in those, I'm like halfway through Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future right now, and then I've been working on a lot of business stuff separate from the show. So I haven't gotten an episode up in a little while, but yeah, that's the gist of it.
Also, apparently, I'm broadcasting here from the surface of the sun compared to the background that the two of you have. So, and it's beyond yours. It's bright in this room. What's going on?
Yes, there's some irony in it because where Matt and I are, it feels like we're on the surface of the sun, and it doesn't where you are. So we're compensating. We're making it nice and moody in here, and it's just darker and a little cooler up there, and you've got to brighten things up.
Well, we'll go with that. That sounds great.
There it is. And whatever face cream you're using it looks good too.
Light, man. I got to turn this light off.
Hey, Adam, one of the things I like about the new direction your show has taken is a very simplistic yet powerful explanation of the name of your show and why you call it that. I've heard you say it now multiple times, and every time it's such an obvious thing, but a lot of people, it doesn't click. And so could you explain that?
The age of information? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So the idea was, the information age, right? We have access to essentially every bit of recorded knowledge in human history, incorrect or correct or assumed or whatnot. We have the internet, we have all of this access. And we're not using it is a problem, and using it wrong is a problem, and knowing what wrong is a problem. So I wanted to kind of say, like, if we don't have the proper context or conceptualization of a worldview in order to disseminate, dissect, understand the information that we have out there, we can fall into a lot of traps. But all of it's there. And when we have a cohesive and coherent worldview that provides justification for our beliefs, and we know through discernment how to interact with this information, we can stop making theological, philosophical, whatever mistakes that we've been making for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And there's really no excuse. There's no excuse for people to not try to find information. And especially with the podcast that three of us are doing and everyone else in this sphere is doing, there's, for people even who don't read, there's audiobooks, there's text to audio, there's podcasts, there's YouTube videos. There's just no excuse to not learn something every day and challenge yourself every day. It's not, the Middle Ages where, you were dipping a feather in ink and hand scribing everything on whatever. It's, it's right here on your phone, on your Apple Watch, beamed into your eyeballs and your brain through Neuralink. So it's one, having no excuse, and two, knowing how to discern and decipher the information in order to make sure you're not being led into destruction, really.
Yeah, well, that's the hardest part of all of that, I think. Along with and this includes me and probably you guys too, sometimes when you see something or learn something or read something that you instinctually know is the actual truth, that it's not what you thought initially, or goes against what we thought was the truth, there's this fallen human instinct to fight it, where you're like, And I mean, I've seen that with the church just in my short stint so far, and it's not a stint, it'll be lifelong, but my short period in it so far, is people learn something or hear something that rubs up against what they think is how it's always been, and they leave. So that's, the toughest part, like you said, is the discernment, of course, but then it can also be very tough to realize, shoot, so this is the real truth, and then just go, all right, I'm in. Have you guys had issues with that, or do you see that?
I this might segue good into Matt, but for me, I grew up in the household where philosophy and psychology was all over the place. It was a very intellectual home, even though we still got into fights and played sports and stayed out after dark and all this stuff. It was very balanced in that way. But I had a philosophy, pretty much a presuppositionalist atheist philosophy in my head, and I was trying to make it work within the confines of the Roman Catholic Church that I grew up in, and I couldn't. And it landed me in a very awkward place where I knew atheism couldn't provide justification for really anything I was doing in life, but I didn't have anything else to plug into that space. And so about a decade later, it was essentially libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism, that kind of a thing. That was the closest thing I could find to something that would provide a coherent worldview, even though I knew it wasn't entirely complete because I was continuing to argue with libertarians all the time about where I thought they were wrong. And then it was like, well, how do I know what quote unquote wrong is, right? The whole you're saying, like, how do you know? Right. So Orthodox Christianity for me came at the right time because I had been trying to work through that for 20 years. And within the span of like 4 months, I just went into, I'm going to pre-sup Orthodox Christianity into the ground. It's not going to hold up, just like nothing else holds up. And not only did it hold up, it like knocked me right on my ass and provided all of the context that I had been looking for all of that time. So, I challenge anybody if people have said like, well, could you kind of logic your way out of orthodoxy? And I was like, yeah, well, I challenge you to present a better argument than Orthodox Christianity for the foundation of all of reality, to which people like, Kinsella or something was like, well, how does Orthodox Christianity explain mathematics? Huh? Bingo. Gotcha, nerd. Right? It's like, well, I mean, what is mathematics? Like, what is knowledge? What is epistemology? Like, yeah, I mean, random scribbles. How do you know those mean things? Right? If you have three things and you take one away, right? Does the concept of three still remain? Stefan Kinsella, like, moron, like, what are you talking about? So yeah, when you have, like, what a crotchety old dude anyway, like, the idea that you wouldn't understand that you can't just randomly have stuff without there being objective meaning in the world. Well, this provides that. So it's on a much bigger level for me.
Go ahead, Matt. I know you've been thinking.
It's interesting. There's the aphorism that knowledge is power. And, I suppose that's true in a certain sense, but ultimately knowledge without wisdom is just folly. You got to have the right context for that knowledge. And I've always been someone who's, I'm a lifelong learner. That's like, I've always been someone who sees myself that way. I'd love to learn, love to find new things, love to read, love to, I'll go down rabbit holes, just, some new subject that catches my attention on YouTube. And then I just spend just days just studying to learn all I can about it. But, it was kind of like I went on this journey where I started. I wanted to figure out like the foundation of reality. Like how do you get to the bottom of everything? What's the underlying substrate that everything else is made of? What is? I wasn't finding anything that answered those kinds of questions. There was a lot of things that claimed to, but none of them really spoke to that. Really, it's kind of like a lot of people weren't even looking for this. And the closest thing that I found to that was either in philosophy or in physics, like advanced, like astrophysics, particle physics, quantum mechanics, that sort of thing. And both of those things are kind of mostly over my head. Like I'm very good at taking in what other people are saying about it, but it's like I'm never going to be a philosopher myself. I'm never going to be able to be a physicist. So I was just kind of just accumulating whatever I could, just trying to sort of slog my way through it and try to understand everything as I went. And the wild thing for me was that encountering Orthodox Christianity was the first time where I saw all of these different issues being like the philosophical issues, the psychological issues, the anthropological issues, the economic issues, the even the physical issues, like physics, even those the physical issues. All of these are all being addressed by a single comprehensive worldview, where there's a place for every one of these things. There's a fundamental foundational explanation for each of these things, and it's not that you just. I think there's a risk that we fall into as Westerners, and I'm sure we could talk about this for many, many podcasts, but the idea that we have to have an explanation or an understanding of everything. And I think even on the basis of Kurt Gödel and the incompleteness theorems, where he used positivism to disprove positivism, he so even within the secular framework, if you think about this in the right way, you'll realize that there's fundamentally going to be things that you never understand that are going to be axiomatic, that you have to take them as axioms, that they're not going to be it's not that they're not substantiated, it's that they're not substantiatable except through experience. It's like starting with this premise and then living according to this premise, then you begin to experience things that reinforce that the starting premises. But we, in the West here, we're kind of like, we have to have an explanation for everything. We have to strip everything apart and get it all as atomized as possible, even literally down to the atom or even further, and then look at each of these things and try to understand them in a vacuum separated from the rest of the context. And what was fascinating to me as I was starting to get into the quantum mechanics sort of thing is realizing that there's so many things that are technically scientific about the study of physics that are straight up magic. It's like quantum tunneling and superposition and all these different types of things that I don't even understand them well enough to explain them. I've just heard them explained and understood them when I did, and realized like this isn't science. These physicists aren't engaged in the process of science anymore as we typically understand it. These guys are religious. They're trying to bootstrap a religion while encountering realities that just fundamentally take their whole religion and crumple it up and toss it in a wastebasket. The great frontier right now in like physics and related fields is coming up with a theory of everything, which is simply for retards like me. Essentially, it just means taking Einsteinian relativity and marrying it to quantum mechanics. And because the two of them basically fundamentally disprove each other, they can't coexist. Yet they're independently verifiable. You can test them and verify them independently, but they each one of them like basically disproves the other. So there is no string theory is kind of like the closest thing or the most popular thing that people have come up with as a potential unification of them. But even that has its own, devout critics who I think make a very good case. So I think for me, getting into orthodoxy really, people talk about being humbled or like humility and that kind of thing. I think the way that I experienced that humility is by giving up this notion that I'm necessarily going to be able to understand everything.
Yeah.
And that be able to explain everything, have an explanation for everything. Yet there's also this reality of being able to understand things better and better as we go along. That's kind of part of the Orthodox theology, the doctrine of theosis, which is in a sense, theosis is kind of part of it is kind of like it's like growing to understand reality better and better as time goes on by participating in the body of Christ. I don't really remember what got me off talking about that. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but
it's funny because when I talk to you, I say this because I think the last two times I've had you on, you say things at certain times, and maybe it's because I know your background, that are still steeped in Austrian economics, and that's not a knock at all because that's still kind of my understanding of economics that I lean towards the most. What you're saying about how the West and then because of the Enlightenment and whatnot, everything has to be proven or charted out or graphed. And Rothbard and these Austrians were like, no, it's a priori knowledge. Like we just understand that it's real. You don't have to find graphs and charts and numerical values to every single thing. We're watching human action and how things work in the real world. It's just funny how that keeps popping up.
It's interesting in the West, we are very uncomfortable with paradoxes. We don't like it when we encounter paradoxes.
Right.
So like a paradox would be like quantum mechanics and Einsteinian relativity.
Because we're trapped in dialectics.
Right. Yes.
It always has to be one versus the other.
There's very good, like you can make a historical case for why this is the way. You can make an anthropological case. You can make a philosophical case. The presence and the dialectics are they're almost like a virus. Where like once you get a dialectic in your society, then it starts like replicating itself. It almost seems. So then we're just trapped in all of these dialectics between male and female and left and right and Republican and Democrat and socialist and libertarian, or we like all these different dialectics where these are false dichotomies. These things, many of these things are functionally, if you zoom out to the appropriate resolution, these are the same thing, like socialism and libertarianism. It's the same thing at the right level of resolution. It's the same thing. And really what this all comes out of, honestly, is a really ancient philosophical problem called the problem of the one and the many.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what orthodoxy, orthodoxy is I want to say
a
this
dialectic smasher.
Yes,
Smasher
it's
of
dialectic
dialectics.
smasher. Yeah.
Yes.
And people, I'll talk to people sometimes who this is like the first time they're encountering orthodoxy, they're asking about it or something. And I struggle sometimes to explain it because coming from a Protestant background, I'd be like, oh, you got your Lutherans and your Methodists and your, Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, whatever, all these people who claim to be Christian. And you have this really good sense of what a religion is. You kind of like, you look at all these different religions and you're like, okay, there's this religion, there's this religion, there's this religion. But like underneath all of that, there's actual reality that we actually engage with. And then religion is like a skin that we overlay on reality to try to help us understand it or something. That's kind of this sort of unspoken assumption, even among devout Christians. And this is something that orthodoxy is the only thing I've ever encountered that doesn't engage in this ritual, ironically enough, engage in this ritual of kind of like pretending there's this foundational reality that we all engage with. And then our religions are just sort of this thing that we overlay and try to use to understand, where orthodoxy is not a religion in the Western sense of religion. Orthodoxy is a posture toward reality. It's fundamentally just a completely different thing altogether. And it's unique. It's the one thing that is like that for, to us, very obvious reasons. It looks like you're squirming, Adam. You have some thoughts?
No, I thought it was a really good way to put that. What do you say? Posturing toward reality?
Yes. A posture toward reality. Yeah.
Posture toward reality. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking
there's a special word for it. It's phronema, but yeah.
It was funny you brought up. I think Buck did Rothbard and sort of the a priori knowledge that he says is just sort of there. It's interesting because I realize that presuppositional philosophy is not like an orthodox thing. I just think it works well, and clearly, because as I found out, many other people have already been doing this for many, many years. It seems to apply itself well, but it's the idea that, rather than just assuming that things are there, they're on the right track with that, right? We kind of have to presuppose specific things in order for reality to work. And everyone does this. Atheists do this, Christians do this, Muslims, everybody does this. It's just that certain ways of thinking can't really, while they're presupposing knowledge, truth, whatever, they don't really have a way of justifying it. But so we would agree, yeah, those things are there, right? The epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, aesthetics, that those things exist. We're realists in that way, but we could actually provide an account for why those things exist even though we would say that we can't empirically prove those things exist. Yeah, we're going to presuppose them, but we can we can show coherence, right? We can show coherence for why these things are and where they came from, as opposed to even a Thomist or somebody along those lines, a natural theology kind of person who is trying to reason up to God rather than divine revelation down, right? An ordering of Christology, soteriology, a different order of doing those things than the West is accustomed to doing them. Whereas, you have certain Protestant groups who are all about divine revelation, right? But then don't have a conceptual framework of what to do with it. And then you have the Roman Catholic Thomistic point of view, which is all about natural theology, natural law, natural revelation, and then reasoning up to what ends up being sort of a generic God that then you have to argue as a Christian God after you've just made him generic. So there's like the wrong conceptualization, the wrong framework from which to make these presuppositions that I actually think works better in an atheist world than it does in a Western Christian world, because they could just presuppose things for no reason, right? And So I think that's where Western Christianity sort of becomes an atheist factory because it's reductionist, right? It provides so little of the framework with so much supernatural nonsense that you sort of like just taking everything on faith doesn't really work, right? There has to be something that you're doing in your life that is showing you that this is working. And if you ground everything down to a materials level, well, then you just have materialism, which for the average everyday person works perfectly fine. To drive your car to work and listen to music and cook dinner.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's for me, which was the most amazing thing was, we can be reductionist and supernatural at the same time, and those things work together harmoniously.
Yes. It's always the both and.
Yeah, there's a word you said in there, Adam, that I was thinking about, and I was glad you kind of almost felt like I telepathically communicated it to you, because right when I thought it, you said it. You said coherence, and there's this. So something, if you're trying to find out something that's true, like it can be true in two different ways. And I sort of understand. I think there's probably a technical philosophical way to explain the correspondence versus coherence theories of truth, but I have a way that works for me, so that I understand it. Essentially, you can have something that's internally true. So it's like a system that everything within the system internally corresponds to itself. And so there's a correspondence relationship there that you can identify, and so therefore it's true. But then that system has to be rooted in something. It has to be grounded in something. It relates to something outside of itself. Mm-hmm. And what is the truthiness or the truth status of that system's relationship to whatever that system is grounded in? So you can look at the internal correspondence of the truth, or you can look at the external coherence of the truth. How you have this belief system. Now, how is this belief system borne out in reality? How does this work when it actually confronts reality? Is it just true in La La Land? Is it just true in your imagination, or is it actually borne out in reality? So your system needs to not just be true per se, it needs to be coherently true. Not just something that you can provide a bunch of internal justifications for it, but it needs to have external justification as well. It needs to have applicability to the world, which means that to use the buzzwords, it's praxis and I can't think of the other term for it right now, like theory and praxis essentially. So it needs to not just be theoretically true, but it also needs to be practically true. And your theory and your praxis have to be the same. They have to, they have to cohere together. Your theory has to form your practice has to inform your theory without generating a self-destructive loop. Libertarians,
I was just going to
generate a self-destructive loop.
I think we were all three looking for this to equal up with one another. This theory and the praxis. That's what our entire quote unquote journey has been. I think that led us to where we're at.
That's what I was going to say when Adam was talking, that it's like materialism is good enough for the people who need to wake up in the morning and go get your coffee and go get in your car and drive to work and do your work and drive home and kiss your wife and all that stuff. Like materialism kind of works for that until you start encountering things that just don't make sense. Mm-hmm. Stuff that just does not fit your preconceived idea about the world. And the last, it's been about 8 years really, but then especially in the last 3 or 4 years, anybody who has above a room temperature IQ has been able to pick up on the fact that there's a lot of stuff happening that materialist explanations for the world don't adequately grapple with. And it just, I don't know, it's gotten to where I can't take you seriously if you haven't dramatically changed your belief structure in the last several years, unless you were already an Orthodox Christian a few years ago. Like that's basically if you have just stayed rooted for the last 4 to 8 years in the way you view the world and how you understand everything to be, and your philosophy and your politics and your ethics and all these things, if these things haven't fairly dramatically morphed and updated for you over the last several years, then I can't take you seriously because you're not tuned into the world, which is ironic to be a materialist people who are somehow completely divorced from the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Materialism is actually, I think, ironically, kind of a form of Gnosticism.
Yes.
Which is another one of these paradoxes.
Yeah. Guys, I have a special announcement for you. Next month on August 18th and 19th, Father Sergius will be speaking at a retreat at the parish St. Matthew the Evangelist in North Royalton, Ohio. That is in the Cleveland area, for those not familiar. Father Sergius, who is he, you might ask? For those of you who don't know, since 2010, he has been the 16th and current abbot of St. Tikhon of Zadonsk Monastery in Pennsylvania, the oldest monastery in America. St. Tikhon is also known for the renowned seminary. Father Sergius will be speaking on the subject matter of his new book, Acquiring the Mind of Christ, Embracing the Vision of the Orthodox Church. In addition, he will be bringing the miracle-working icon of St. Anna, the mother of the Holy Virgin Mary, for prayer and veneration. This icon of St. Anna began weeping myrrh on Mother's Day, how perfect is that, of 2004. It has since stopped weeping, but exudes a wonderful heavenly fragrance to this very day. She is said to provide assistance and healing to the faithful that pray with her, especially to couples who are praying for a child. So this retreat, what is it, you ask? Well, it begins with a prayer service at 6 p.m. on Friday, with the first session to follow. The rest of the event will take place from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Saturday, to be completed with the Vespers service. Any that wish may participate in the liturgy on Sunday, of course, Sunday morning, where Father Sergius will be giving the sermon. Snacks and meals will be provided, and the retreat is free for all people. Free, guys. Please join Father Sergius and our brothers and sisters at St. Matthew in North Royalton, Ohio, for a spiritually enriching weekend of prayer and fellowship. If you would like to know more, go to www.stmattroyalton.org. That's STMatt, M-A-T-T, Royalton.org, and look for the current events in the event page. Please be sure to RSVP as soon as possible with the contacts listed so they know about how much food to provide. And please tell them I sent you. Say Buck Johnson from the Counterflow podcast sent me. St. Matthew will be glad to have you. Thank you, and God bless. Wow. Is there something, I mean, this isn't totally jumping paths, but because we touched upon it briefly earlier, in, let's call it ancient Christianity or traditional, our version, I suppose, of Christianity. I almost don't like saying that phrase. And I should also say, none of us are professionals on here, that we're not speaking for the Orthodox Church. And forgive me for anyone who knows more than I do about this stuff, which is most of you, for if I sound like I ask something in an ignorant way. But back to my question. It does seem like, as I learn more about the past, the early church, that they viewed Christ in the here and now, if that makes sense, rather than, it seems like maybe more modern day versions of Christianity, or the liberalized Western version, or whatever you want to call it. It's like you try to be a good person, and then Christ happens when you die. Do you guys see that difference? And I'm not sure where this, maybe it came from 1054. We can get into that. But Adam, I'll let you jump in first.
Well, I mean, I've heard, and probably you guys have too, multiple clergy speak on this, right? And a lot of times you'll hear like Christ's second coming as if he's just not around.
Right.
And,
Yes.
Father Stephen DeYoung has brought up a story, this same story on numerous episodes of whatever show he's doing, about the woman, some Protestant pastor woman or something, who was weeping that Jesus wasn't here, and he was going to come back one day, or so. I'm butchering the story, but the idea that the idea that Christ is always present and that the Holy Spirit is always guiding the church. Yeah, that doesn't change from, the resurrection to Pentecost to now, right? And that's something that, Western Christianity doesn't really have a concept. That there's little bits of that here and there, but without the essence energies distinction, without the idea of theosis, there isn't really, whether they pay lip service to it or not, there isn't really a way to know God in this world. And you can know really all three persons of the Trinity in this world, right? And that if you can't, right, if you're a Thomist or something who's, trying to reason up to God from an earthworm, yeah, you're gonna feel you're gonna feel like there's not really a thing here, even though you're going to say that you can feel it, or the very, not every Protestant, but very lame Protestant, like Jesus is my co-pilot, or I have a personal relationship with Jesus, that it just becomes sort of like a 1-900 number from the 90s that you'd see at like 2:00 in the morning.
Jesus is a friend of mine. Yes.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, no, because that's not really calling you to action. He's like hanging out with you at the soccer game or something. So that, there just isn't really a way to interact with the Trinity in this world outside of Orthodox Christianity. So
Matt.
Yeah, I mean, the church is the body of Christ. And I've heard this all my life. The church is the body of Christ. And I'm just kind of like, oh yeah, it's like the body that is Christ's favorite, kind of. Or like we talk about like a body of people, like, there's a body of people present for this thing or something. So we'll kind of use the word body in more of kind of a metaphorical sense in that way. But we think of it that way. We think of this as like a metaphorical thing. But no, the church is the body of Christ. When the Bible talks about us being his hands and feet, like, the church is the body of Christ. And we don't think of bodies this way. We have a very rigid materialist definition of body. But I mean, if you read the Bible, it will talk about like God's right arm or the eyes of God. And these are, it's not saying that like that God has, like corneas and irises, or they like a physical right arm, but it's referring to the acts of God in the world. God acts in the world through his body, and the church is the body of Christ. One of the things that we see ourselves as very enlightened, very that we understand the world better than ever, and in some really foundational ways, we actually understand the world worse than ever.
Mm-hmm.
The ancient people that we see as like backwards, inbred pagans and stuff. I mean, well, a lot of them were inbred pagans, but they had a lot of things backwards. But they understood reality more directly than we actually do, because they understood that reality was not strictly the material things they were looking at in front of them. That reality has a spiritual component, and that spiritual component is just as real as the physical component.
Yes.
It's the same reality. There isn't a spiritual reality and a physical reality. It's one reality that we experience in a spiritual way and in a physical way. So the idea that a body of people is the body of a divine being would not be challenging to them. They would understand, oh yeah, there are divine beings who interact with the world, and the way that they interact with the world is through people. Mm-hmm. That people are their body, their physical body in the world. So I know Father Stephen DeYoung, he harps on this a lot when people will say like like Christ's return or Christ's second coming, or Jesus. He's like, because that implies he's not here right now, but he is here right now. It actually is true now that God does have a cornea and an iris. There is God. Jesus is God, and Jesus has a physical body. He has a physical body as a man and will for all of eternity. So now God has a physical body, but God continues to have a spiritual body as well. So Christ is here now, and Christ will reappear then. And these will be different experiences of Christ, but it's Christ just the same. So the church is his body in the world today, and Christ will return again. I just did it. Christ will reappear again, and we'll be able to experience him in his spiritual body and in his physical body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if somebody wants a good example of the kind of dichotomy here, I just did an episode with Dr. J.T. Bridges, who's a philosopher and theologian. He's got an MDiv. He was just on the show. I think it was the last episode. I like him. He's an awesome dude. And we were doing like pre-sup on evolution, Darwinian evolution. And one of the things I liked about that conversation, and I told him I wasn't going to debate him on this, but I did slip a couple things in there, is how he describes Thomas Aquinas and sort of the Protestant mind-body, soul-body duality, right? And I mentioned just in passing, and I told him I was going to do this beforehand because I don't like debating my friends. There's no concept of the nous in Western Christianity, so you don't have the triune human being, the mind, soul, and spirit. You don't have that ability, even conceptually, it doesn't exist in schema.
Adam, real quick, explain what the nous is for those listening, and then keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, so nous in the transliteration from the Greek, it's the if you know how to say it better, it's sort of the spiritual organ that the Christian uses to connect with God through that's theosis. Theosis is through the noetic capability, the noetic spiritual organ, so to speak.
Yes,
sometimes it's referred to as the mind or the heart. Those are kind of words that we use that sort of get at it, but it's actually a real thing.
Mm-hmm. And ours is often clouded, and I've always heard the analogy to it's like a dirty windshield. And Father Turbos told me when he became my spiritual father, I'm here to help you see Christ. And I thought about it for like weeks and then months, and that's like, oh, I get it. To help cleanse my nous so I can see him. And you got to go through things to get that clean. You know, he can provide the windshield wiper fluid, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Then St. Paul said that we see through a glass darkly. Mm-hmm. That's where the people at the time who read what he was saying would have understood what he was talking about because they had this context for the nous. That's the process he's describing. Like we see through a glass darkly today. Our nous is clouded. Our nous isn't fully matured and developed. Which would be like what a modern Western Christian might refer to as like spiritual self-development or something like that, where they're sort of approximating this thing. Anyways, please continue, Adam.
Or something that, a new ager or someone in that spiritual, not religious, might call like
third eye.
Pineal gland. Yeah, the third eye.
I was interested to find out it has its origins in René Descartes, which is pretty interesting. As far as I know, he listened to
that makes sense now.
Put that forward, but that's the same concept, right? The idea of communing directly with the Most High.
Was Descartes an occultist?
Well, he was a Christian to a point. I mean, all of those guys kind of were like the pre and early Enlightenment guys. Were all trying to come up with a conceptualization of God, and which probably finds its worst manifestation in Spinoza's sort of just thing that's out there somewhere, and then Hegel's thing with it. We need to get into all that, but yeah, I mean the idea of communing with the God that's here, working through the body of Christ right now is something that isn't like an Orthodox invention either. That's like you pointed out in Scripture, and it's always been part of the tradition of the church, going all the way back.
Have you guys read? I actually don't like usually doing this. It feels rude to guests. Y'all are my friends. Have y'all read Orthodox Study? What is it called? Orthodox Survival Guide by Father Seraphim?
Not yet. It's on my list.
Okay. It's really hard to find in print, of course, but it's available in PDF. In it, he was the first one that I read. I should shout out to my godfather. I won't say his name because I don't want to dox him, but he's special, and he gave me all this stuff from Father Seraphim. And he said, read this Orthodox Survival Guide. And that was the first place I ever read. If you look at all the bad things throughout history that we all look back upon, I go, well, this was a horrible time in world history. He tied it back. Father Seraphim Rose tied it to 1054, the Great Schism. I believe Father John Strickland calls it the Great Divide. I can't remember specifically, but I think that's what he calls it. And then as I started reading these books, the books that Adam, you've been doing readings on your show, and I will have Father John on next week's show discussing the books and specifically part 4. But it basically, his whole thesis is that everything bad that's happened, I'm putting it broadly, started with the Great Schism of 1054. And because it's so, especially from the political circles we have run in the past, there's times where we're like, well, it was the 60s, or well, it was the 20s, or well, it's when the German school or Frankfurt school screwed everything up. And I find it, when I read Father Seraphim, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know what the Great Schism was, but certainly the way he reasoned out and showed step by step, as Father John Strickland does in this book series, it's pretty easy to tie it back to 1054. Adam, you've been focusing a lot on this series. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, while you were discussing that, I found a audio YouTube course for that.
That's great. Yes.
So I figured you probably had it too. That would be probably how I would consume it.
Yep.
So I'm sorry, just reiterate again.
I guess my mind was kind of blown reading Father Seraphim and now Father John Strickland, how people with our political background start, well, where did this come from? Where did this problem start? And I had never until, I guess, 18 months ago, ever even considered that it went that far back that could have sprung a lot of the problems that we all talk about now. How do we stop this? How do we stop that? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a big question, right?
That is, I know. But I know you have thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few, if not several hundred years of stuff that went on from the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the time of Saint Augustine, when he's writing City of God. There's that to Charlemagne and the Franks to 1054. There's a whole basically second half of that first book that Father John Strickland is writing that discusses. There's just so many things that the West, well, in a lot of the circumstances, the West is actually defending orthodoxy from a heretical East. And you see this kind of go back and forth depending on which emperor or which patriarch and which position. There's, I think it's, say Pope Leo, so I'm going to get it wrong. One of the popes vehemently defends not having the filioque in the creed against the folks in the East, and has it actually like carving of it put outside St. Peter's or something. It's hard to think of all the stuff off the top of my head, but eventually when you get to the schism, I would say probably what happens between the years of the Great Schism and the Second Council of Lyon in 1272 is really, that's really the philosophy, the change in theology that isn't political really anymore. Because the Charlemagne thing, the Franks, that was all very, very political, and they tweaked and maneuvered theology to kind of fit the political pattern. I don't see that so much when you get up into like Anselm, Abelard, Bernard of Clairvaux, Thomas Becket, Maimonides, like this, Francis of Assisi, Bonaventure, Thomas Aquinas, Duns Scotus, right? You don't see, there are political machinations moving around, but I think really it's 1272, the Second Council of Lyon, where I wrote it down. So Pope Gregory X and Michael, the Eastern Emperor, Michael the Eighth, attempt to bring the church back together to end the schism. And I think there's a moment at which actually both East and West are reciting the filioque in the creed multiple times to kind of celebrate this. And then all of the Orthodox patriarchs and all the members of the council go back to Orthodox land, and all the people throw them out of the churches and run them out of town and try to burn them at the stake. And the people didn't want anything to do with it, even though the clergy did. And not to jump too far forward, but I think you're going to see this in the potential 2025 reuniting council between East and West and Bartholomew and Frankie Frank, where the people just aren't going to do it. They're not going to want this. And I don't know what kind of following the ecumenical patriarch has outside of the Greek church. To be honest, Goarch, I don't really know. But I imagine it would be a very similar way of looking at it. And this is all very political now, right? It's the ecumenical patriarch gets no support from really anyone on the planet. And so this is kind of his way of, I don't want to say posturing, but sort of trying to be relevant and trying to be out there and help people. I think it's a dangerous game. And I hope that the people react in the same way. But this, again, Orthodox Christianity has sort of, and you see in these examples, maintained a very consistent way of life over time. And as Matt said, an interpretation of reality, or the interpretation of reality. Whereas the West is constantly, battling back and forth in these philosophical dialectics, this conversation of philosophy over the course of a millennium, where they just got so far out of step with what was consistent in the East since at least like the 600s or 700s, like at least that time. It's been pretty consistent. I don't see how it could reconcile really. I mean, obviously the Pope would have to not be infallible anymore, right? I mean, I don't know how that would even work. But all that stuff, just gets tacked on over the years to try to justify a position that's really not justifiable. Yeah, I don't. There's so many things we can get into. I don't. Maybe Matt has a more concise way, not stammering all over answering that.
I mean, at this point, if you're talking about like reconciliation is basically just going to look like Catholics becoming Orthodox, essentially, because they've diverged so far now that you can't have specific doctrines that explicitly refute one another and put that into the same body and say we're the same. Again, this is just the opinion of a layman, just kind of shooting from the hip about that. With respect to the schism, it's interesting to me, just kind of, again, just sort of a layman just pondering it. It's interesting to me that the two fundamental, there's a number of different things, but like the two fundamental conflicts that precipitated the schism were the filioque and the Pope, the role of the Pope. And it's from an Orthodox perspective, the filioque is essentially an attack on the Holy Spirit. And the Pope is in many ways an attack on Christ. It's positioning the Pope in the role of what people be like, oh, he's the human head of the earthly church. And it's like, who do you think Jesus is? Like Jesus is the human head of the earthly church. So that dynamic there is just very interesting to me. It just happens that the two things that precipitated the schism primarily were one of them is essentially a direct assault on one member of the Trinity, and the other is a direct assault on the other. I'm not going to say what I was going to say. I don't want to be. I kind of started off a lot of my internet posting, public talking career being pretty like hostile and combative, and maybe not hostile or combative, but just very intentionally polemical. And I've realized since then that it's probably not really all that worth it. So, what's the saying about catching more flies with honey than vinegar?
Yes. Yeah.
So there's just certain things I'll just choose not to say. But with respect to the idea that everything kind of started then, I'd be very interested to hear to actually read Father Seraphim's take on that, because it seems a little like I wouldn't say that, because I would feel like I'm being overly reductionistic if I was to say that. I do think that it's interesting that that's kind of the like if you were going to try to go to like find a point where the West versus the East really becomes a thing, it's kind of there. Like obviously there was a West and an East before then, because they were in tension, and you had an Eastern and Western Roman Empire, and I mean, but like that's kind of the point where these two really foundational subjects caused a sharp divergence. And it was just a schism for the first couple hundred years, and then that schism became a full-blown split. But ever since then, now, what would you call it? Like the heresy sprouting mechanism in the West has gone gangbusters. So there's just been heresies just sprouting up left and right like crazy throughout the West, and all kinds of different denominations, different expressions of Christianity. Christianity's gotten increasingly more and more subjective, and I mean, really modern day secularism is just a kind of like a deracinated sort of really lame version of Christianity that has just had all the spirit taken out of it, which is kind of a reason for that.
Right.
But I'm kind of trying to play with this idea of there's this dialectic thing that keeps happening in the West, and I'm very curious where that comes from. Like why the West keeps devolving into these dialectic splits. And I really, really want to say it was 1054, because that would just, from a narrative perspective, that would just work so well. but something makes me feel like there was something before then, even that like this phenomenon didn't begin then. But I don't, at this point, that taps out a lot of my knowledge of history and philosophy. So I wouldn't really be able to present an alternate case.
Go ahead, Adam.
The only thing I could really guess on that is just what you can see happening. If you look at all the names that, are involved in Western Christianity, from Augustine to, all the way up, right? It's every one of them is coming up with some new idea, some new ontological argument, the cosmological argument, the satisfaction theory of atonement, the moral influence theory of atonement, that there's just a need to one up the next guy or have an argument with the other dude. And this really gives, the Roman Catholic Church, by the time of Pope Alexander, the Borgias, is, not to be offensive, but it's literally a whorehouse, right? The Vatican's a whorehouse when the Borgias are in power. And so it's not surprising that you would get people who wanted to, quote unquote, reform the church, right? In the Protestant Reformation. And what they're doing is just what all of the Roman Catholic Western, peeps were doing for the previous 700-800 years, 900 years before them, which is just battling with each other over whose intellectual ideas put a conceptualization of God and the church into normal people's heads. And basically the normal people didn't want anything to do with this. Like Luther was constantly frustrated that nobody would read his, hundreds and hundreds of pages. And people were like, we have farms, dude. Like, what are you telling us? It's like a practical use to our life. Where you have in the East, Maximus the Confessor, John of Damascus, Mark of Ephesus, Photius the Great, like all of these early, middle of the first millennium church fathers who were involved in ecumenical councils, right? We're still using them in homilies today. Nobody is quoting Peter Abelard at the Roman Catholic Mass on Easter. You know what I mean? Or like, what? So I think I don't know why necessarily that happened, but there seemed to be this just sort of materialist push to sort of survive, evolve doctrine, something. And maybe if I think about it more, it comes from like the Charlemagne Frank era, the kind of having to one up the East kind of thing. Maybe it comes from having to rebuild essentially a broken empire in, the early Middle Ages. The Roman Catholic Church having to step up and be a political authority, and therefore having to sort of run the land and the polis, whereas, the East didn't really have that problem. And then what it did when it was finally taken over by the Turks in the 1400s, it was just under subjugation for the next 500 years, where it didn't have any political authority at all. And so it kind of stayed what it was. It didn't evolve, right? There was constant evolution on one side and constant non-evolution on the other side. And, I guess you could guess at why that was in the West, but it just seemed like you go from one person to the next person to the next person, decade after decade, and they're either arguing against the previous church person's position, the previous scholastic position, or they are essentially evangelizing the previous position, right? Like Peter Lombard's sentences gets taken up by, different people, whether it's Aquinas or whomever. they're pro this thing. And that's all the thing, right? This standard textbook of theology for 300 years, right? Or you have people who are completely against Lombard, and that's the argument in the church. You don't really have things like that in the history of Orthodox Christianity. Like, you do have disagreements, but I think to people in the West, they would be seen as sort of minutia. And heard this from, Tradcats and Sedevacantists and stuff. One of them we all know. I won't blow it up here. But the idea that like the Orthodox are just stubborn for not wanting to come back into communion with the Roman Catholic Church. Like, just stop being stubborn, right? What are you so stubborn about? Like, can't you just do it? Like, well, the Filioque way, this church father said it. Oh, if you interpret it this way, it's not a big deal, right? So it's not a big deal. Just come home. Just reunite. Why are you being so stubborn? It's like, what are you talking about? You have no idea. How do you not have an idea of the differences in these things? Like, we understand Roman Catholicism pretty well, or at least I'll say I do. I don't see Roman Catholics, especially like the Loftons of the world, or even Eric Ibarras of the world, have no idea what Orthodox Christianity is. And my dumbass was able to figure it out in a couple of years for the most part, at least to be able to have some semblance of like credibility here. And like, these guys are like published scholars. Like, what are you talking about? How do you not know this? I don't know. It just gets to be like super weird and frustrating, but that's part of their tradition. Part of their tradition is to be super weird and frustrating and argue with everybody all the time.
In the book, in this book series that Father John Strickland wrote, and again, Adam's been doing readings of it. Actually, he did one with me and then also one with Matt. The one with Matt is amazing, and there's some quite hilarious moments in there. I suggest that one. But he talks about Christendom having placed communion with God as the highest measure of human well-being. And I started thinking about the difference in, let's say, democracy, liberal Western democracy. Even the preamble of the Constitution, it says the pursuit of happiness. And so it seems like liberal democracy, and yes, I know if you're going clickety-clack, we're a republic, not a democracy, but this is broad generalization here, pushed a more atomized, like an individualist, modern man seeking his own good. I mean, we could even put the non-aggression principle in here at some point if you wanted to, or the harm principle, as some people have called it, where, do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting anyone else. You seek your own happiness versus maybe what a traditional Christendom preached, no pun intended, early on. What are y'all's thoughts on the balance or the contrasting of those two ideas?
Go for it, Adam.
Well, actually, I was thinking, I don't think the pursuit of happiness was in the original draft. I think it was life, liberty, property. And I think that it changed to, this is totally out of my butt, but I'm pretty sure it was changed to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness because somebody didn't want the word property in there. And so it was sort of like, we look back on that as, you know, an original idea that was core to the Constitution, but I think it was a compromise position because it's vague and doesn't really mean anything, right? And then also the idea that the people who wrote that were either total deists, you know, Satanists like Benjamin Franklin, or maybe Unitarian Universalists, or perhaps there was a Puritan thrown in or two. Right. So a lot of these people have very material conceptualizations of the world. And so you can just throw an amorphous God in there. But are we talking about, you know, the God of Benjamin Franklin? Are we talking about the God of Gandhi? You know, are we talking about the God of Baruch Spinoza? Like, what are we talking about? And then what happens, I think, is pretty obvious to see. You get the monad. You get what we have now: universal religion, the World Faith Center, Abrahamic Faith Center, World Council of Churches. You know, we all believe in the same God, dude. You know, universe is God, dude. Right? You get that from amorphous wording in documents that, you know, I mean, if you didn't say that these rights came from God, I mean, how do you even sell something like the Constitution of the Declaration of Independence? I mean, how would you even sell it? Because everybody I don't think there were a lot of atheists, you know, floating around in the common people world. But there certainly were amongst the people who were writing those documents for sure. And they all had very different ideas. I mean, John Adams probably was the most Christian of any of those guys. And you have a lot of deists, Puritans, Universalists, Unitarians. They probably didn't even care that much. They went to church on Sunday or whatever, but, you know, they were more concerned with life, liberty, and property, right? You have Hobbes, Locke,
yes,
all these guys. Who's the other? Edmund Burke, you know, these guys, all of that influenced Adam Smith. And I used to love Adam Smith too. He was one of my Theory of Moral Sentiments was one of the first real libertarian books I ever read, like 15 years ago. But looking back on that now, you can see how, rather than being this sweet, caring kind of balance to the wealth of nations about ethics and morality, it's really just an empiricist document of a guy trying to work out why anyone should care about any of these things. Like, why should people, like the things Matt and you've been saying for the last 3 years, you know, liberty from what? Freedom from what? Like, these guys had to justify their position in their own head. So, you know, we'll come up with God, we'll use God. But clearly that's not the same God that we believe in, you know. were you looking up the pursuit of happiness thing? Yeah.
Yeah. So the original quote from John Locke was life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness at the behest of Benjamin Franklin and George Mason. And the phrase pursuit of happiness came from Locke. This is Locke's, there's a short paragraph here, what Locke said about the pursuit of happiness, quoting. So this is, John Locke was a Puritan. So he's like a Protestant Christian, technically. That's his philosophical background. The necessity of pursuing happiness is the foundation of liberty. As therefore the highest perfection of intellectual nature lies in a careful and constant pursuit of true and solid happiness, so the care of ourselves that we mistake not imaginary for real happiness is the necessary foundation of our liberty. The stronger ties we have to an unalterable pursuit of happiness in general, which is our greatest good, and which, as such, our desires always follow, the more are we free from any necessary determination of our will to any particular action. Close quote.
I totally disagree with that.
Also,
the last part is the opposite. But go ahead, Adam.
Well, I say, what is his definition of those words? Right.
What I was going to point out is how just kind of like analytical and detached this all sounds. And I tend to kind of have an analytical and detached style of writing, and analytical and detached writing was kind of just the feature of things back then, kind of. But like he's talking about like the deepest foundational aspects of humanity. Like this is our, what did he say? The necessary foundation of our liberty, the stronger ties we have to an unalterable pursuit of happiness in general, which is our greatest good.
Yeah,
like,
I totally disagree with that.
It's like, it's the absolute deification of the human will.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
This is when you understand that he believed in tabula rasa, and he was a strict empiricist. He basically was the progenitor of the social contract theory, been called the father of liberalism, right? When you understand his view, right, then if you were born tabula rasa, total blank slate, and sense data is the only thing that you can have any real reliance on in how to live in the world, then what is the pursuit of happiness? It's the pursuit of material gain. It's the pursuit of mammon.
Mm-hmm.
That would have to be the logical conclusion, because in his mind, he's like, well, you have less stuff. This person has more stuff. So this person is more successful. Therefore, that must be what the pursuit of happiness entails.
And there was a word that it wasn't unbridled, but it was something like that. Unalterable pursuit. It's like he might as well be the father of postmodernism, because he's basically saying pleasure is your ultimate end. And that's like, as long as you have this direct path to whatever makes you happy, you're freer. And in my opinion, it's the opposite of that. You become a slave to that. If we could literally have anything we wanted, that's why I won't get into it, but that's why you see a lot of the elite going into strange activities. But you become a slave to that because you're constantly searching for your own like false version of theosis that's not the real version. And so you keep hitting these pitfalls, and there's an empty feeling about it. Anyway, I could go on and on. That quote made me mad. Sorry.
So parsing it one more time here, the stronger ties we have to an unalterable pursuit of happiness in general, which is our greatest good, and which, as such, our desires always follow. So he's saying that this unalterable pursuit of happiness in general is our greatest good, and that our desires always follow our greatest good. And that greatest good is this unalterable pursuit of happiness. So the stronger ties we have to that unalterable pursuit of happiness, the more are we free from any necessary determination of our will to any particular action. So he's warring against like a determinism. He's seeking to transcend any kind of determinism. This is the absolute freedom of the individual will. But it's fascinating that in this whole thing, it's completely impersonal. It's totally depersonalized, rational analytic. This is a human being taking the concept of a human and just viewing it as a data point.
Yes.
Taking this abstract human, viewing it as a data point, and stripping the personhood out of it.
Yes, that's what Ayn Rand did.
There's a spiritual reality to this. This is a spiritual reality because where does personhood come from? Any good Jay Dyer listener will know that there is no generic personhood to be had. You don't have some generic personhood as a starting point. Our personhood is derived from the starting point of our Ordo Theologiae, which is the personhood of the Father. So if you're stripping personhood out of your analysis of humanity, then you're necessarily divorcing humanity from God.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned postmodernism. I mean, postmodernism is interesting because it's a complete reaction to all of this.
Yeah.
In the opposite way, but you can only have that if you're maintaining the same metaphysics.
Correct.
Or lack of metaphysics in this sense, right? Like,
right. Because they actually made a few good points, but it's like they had the wrong, they nailed the right, I don't know, some of the right problems, but had the wrong medicine for it, if you will. But there is an argument to be had that you can use a postmodernism argument on certain people without actually being a postmodernist, and you'd win the argument if that's important to you.
I mean, you saw the same thing with when the Protestant reformers post Luther, the Melanchthon, these people, the Tübingen school really reached out to the Patriarch of Constantinople. I have a book on it that I read last summer, and they were basically like, "Hey, you guys agree with all this stuff we're doing too, right? Roman Catholicism sucks, man, right?" And the Patriarch was like, "Well, you know." So you can have this postmodern reaction to modernism that, you know, it might be a proper reaction. But as the Protestants did when they were trying to break away from the Roman Catholic Church, they are maintaining a lot of the wrong presuppositions and dragging that into their new theology.
Yes.
And you see postmodernism doing the same thing. It's a reaction against this. It's supposed to be antithetical, but it maintains all of the same presuppositions in order to be against them. Because you can't be against something if you haven't accepted it as true, right? You can't be an atheist if you don't believe in God. It doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. Well,
postmodernism as a phenomenon is like the collective human spirit going insane. It's because it's the collective. You have like positive feedback loops where doing something causes something that causes the thing that causes the thing that causes the thing, and that. Postmodernism is like the latest iteration of this form of deconstructionism.
Yes.
Where it's this spirit of deconstructionism is running amok now and is just deconstructing everything. And you can even deconstruct it. Yes. And you can even take that thing and you can deconstruct it, and you could deconstruct that too, and you could just keep deconstructing all the way down. But man was put on earth in Genesis, man was put on earth to exercise dominion over the world, to establish order into the world. This is what was the first task that Adam was given was name the animals. Name the animals doesn't mean, all right, you're tiger and you're koala and you're bear. It's name the animals means to provide an identity to that thing, to inform that thing as to where it exists with respect to all the other things. Naming the animals is creating borders. It's establishing structure. So this spirit of deconstructionism is explicitly antithetical to Christianity.
Yes.
Because it is in the act of deconstructing humanity. This is humanity is going schizophrenic. The spirit of humanity collectively is going schizophrenic, and you can see it in all of the art. All of the art is like you've got this spectrum where you have like pure autism on one side, which is every single thing is isolated and atomized and has nothing to do with any other thing. There's no such thing as context or nuance. And then you've got pure schizophrenia on the other hand, which is everything is absolutely related and connected. There are no borders dividing anything. Every concept is not just related to this concept, but it's actually the same concept. And what's funny is that if you take these two opposite extremes, you wind up in the same place.
Yes.
Because radical egalitarianism, where literally everything is exactly equal, like, for example, a political philosophy that presumes that we're all individuals that all need to be in the same hierarchical position with respect to one another. What you're doing is you are by destroying all differentiation, you're just ripping out all order. You're stripping everything away, and you're left with a big undifferentiated chaotic soup that this is you were talking about libertarianism and like the nap and having these sorts of philosophies that are just kind of like, they're like ad hoc, depersonalized, like they have no, we were talking earlier about coherence. They have no actual coherence to reality. You can't ground them. You can't apply them. There's no practical reality to them. Libertarianism in particular is explicitly a negative philosophy. So
right.
It's there's like this, it's like a parlor trick where you are presenting something as if it is a positive contribution and it's actually a negative contribution. All it is just a critique. It's just a critique that has no actual way of being embodied. Libertarianism has no spirit. It's
Correct.
a spirit of absence of spirit.
Yes.
So you can't embody libertarianism.
Yes.
You can embody people who call themselves libertarians. So you can pick your icon of libertarianism and then you can act like him. But he's just doing that to someone else. And that someone else is doing that to someone else as well. So if you don't trace this back, then you don't even know who you're following to begin with.
That's right. And I think even if that sounded prickly to some libertarians listening to this, if you think about what he just said with an open mind, I'm not going to name any of them, but there are libertarians or people who formerly called themselves libertarians who I've always respected, who would have said that when they called themselves libertarian. There's always been the thin libertarianism. It's a legal structure. It's a legal foundation. Of course, it doesn't embody people. It's not supposed to, kind of is what they would say is my guess. I'm not trying to put words in people's mouth, but there's even the old adage of what you can't herding libertarians, getting them to agree on something like herding cats. It's because it's such a thin little layer of what's actually there that everything else is overcoming it. All of the human instinct, our human spirit, because there's too much other stuff going on within everyone that you can't actually nail down or encompass with libertarianism.
Yeah, I mean, well, from an Orthodox Christian point of view, there's nothing particularly appalling about the non-aggression principle, right?
Right.
It's okay. I can agree to the non-aggression principle. The difference is, my worldview can provide a justification for what should be a non-aggression principle, and yours can't, right?
And not just a justification for it, but a way of embodying that. Then, because the non-aggression principle says, "Here's what you shouldn't do." It doesn't say, "Here's what you should do."
Correct.
Right? Yeah. Right. And it also begs the question: why shouldn't I do anything? Right. In the libertarian, and I think this is why I had a really hard time with people who are both libertarians and Christians, because if the way I understand it and the way I kind of wish everybody else understood it is that if you're a Christian libertarian, what do you have the libertarianism for?
Correct.
It's Christianity is lacking something.
Yes.
You need to mesh them together. Orthodox Christianity doesn't need libertarianism because it encompasses all of that and way more.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's redundant at best, right? It doesn't need to be there.
Correct.
So if your Protestant Christianity has you left in a material world where you can't really interact with God, or you can interact with him so much he's hanging with you, right? Like, then you're going to need something like libertarianism in there to kind of give you the structure of reality, because you don't have divine revelation, or you have a weird type of it that doesn't provide you structure. It doesn't cause you to see reality the way that it is. So you need something else to plug in. Like, I would, for the most part, agree with everything libertarians agree with. I just don't agree with their reason for agreeing with it.
That's fair. Yeah.
And that's not just a semantic point either. Like, that's a big deal. Like having the proper motivations, having the proper, guys, I mean, it gives you something to do, because ultimately it's like, as a human being, you're more than just your thoughts. Like this Western Christian notion, Western Protestant Christian notion that is leaked into the rest of the culture is that, like, all that matters is what you think. That beliefs are thoughts that you think and not actions that you take. Your beliefs are the actions that you take. They're the way that your thoughts become embodied. Literally, like, you have a thought, and then that thought needs to go from in here into the world. It needs to be brought into the world.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why faith first works isn't a real argument.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Your thoughts don't exist in your thoughts don't exist in your head. Your thoughts aren't like, they don't sprout out of your brain chemicals. When you're thinking, you're engaging in a spiritual reality.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking is a spiritual activity. So as a spiritual activity, you can do it in a good way and you can do it in a bad way. You need to make sure you're thinking in a good way. But then more than just thinking, you need to actually be embodying those thoughts. And the reality is that you will embody your thoughts, whether you do intentionally or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what will reveal what you actually believe. Because what you actually believe is the thing that you do. If you say, I believe there's a train coming down the tracks and I don't want to be hit by a train, and then you step onto the tracks, clearly you didn't actually believe one of those things. So when you actually believe something, it will inform the way that you behave, and you're going to get this marriage of heaven and earth, where you have the thoughts and the acts, and then the thoughts are like the heavenly thing, and the acts are the earthly thing, and they get married. They're brought together in the person, in the human person. And in this sense, we're an icon of Christ, because Christ is like the point at which heaven and earth meet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Adam, I mean, I'll get you all out of here now. It's been a little bit. Every time I glance up, it looks like you're playing bass.
Playing bass?
Yeah. Now can you see it?
Yeah. I totally.
It looks like your right hand's down playing it, and your left hand's.
So I finally, like, I don't know if I just got more comfortable since we got the office set up, and I like the feel of this room, but it was so hard for me to stay still in the early videos and the early podcasts. To like, I know Matt does it really well. Buck, you do it pretty well. Kenyote,
I do this a lot.
Statue. When
He's great at it. He's just like this. I don't know how he does that.
Like, people always think I'm like being fidgety or I can't but I can't sit still, dude. I absolutely cannot. And
same.
So yeah, I don't know what it looks like.
No, I kept having a corner in my eye. I was like, looks like Adam's just playing bass up here.
I do have a guitar back there somewhere.
If I could show you my desk, I've got like an old spoon. I've got a pen. I've got like a flossing toothpick thing. I've got all kinds of stuff. And I'm sitting down here just wildly fidgeting the whole time. So I channel everything into my hands.
MacGyver could make a BOMB with all of those things right there. And well, and see, I'm constantly writing and circling and all this stuff. Adam, is there any good news you could share with the people in your life coming up?
Yeah, we'll be getting married it'll be now 16 days.
Excellent.
16 days in a couple of hours. So that's almost 2 weeks, man. Whoa.
Are you excited?
Yeah, I'm not someone who gets excited. I don't know what that word really means. I get like nervous or agitated or anxious but I think for the first time in a while, just in the last week, because it's coming up really soon, I think excited is the word. It's almost like this is something I didn't think was ever really going to happen in my life.
Yeah.
And especially based on previous circumstances with other potential human partners who were maybe not the best for me, and I was making bad decisions. So yeah, I think it is exciting. It's like, growing up at 41 is kind of a weird place to be, but
you were a few years earlier than me, so congrats on that. Is he excited? Just kidding.
No, Matt, are you?
I'm just messing with Adam.
I'm over here catching strays.
He's got a beautiful fiance. I'm excited for them both. Matt, any fun things to discuss before we get out of here? Leave people on a happy note.
I think a wedding is a pretty happy note.
I've
always considered myself kind of a hopeless romantic, so I'll say Mazel Tov to that. And yeah, I don't really have anything else that's going on right now.
Kingpilled stuff.
Hoping to get some more episodes out here soon. Some of this one of the things I've been thinking about a lot and listening to lately is stuff related to like Jonathan Pageau, Symbolic World.
Me too.
Some of that kind of stuff. And I've had a lot of really interesting thoughts about, how would I say this concisely? The fundamental nature of the masculine and feminine. And that really, once you have the proper understanding of what masculine and feminine are and the relationship that they have to each other, then it's kind of like a key that will unlock any lock. It just enables you to, in virtually any circumstance, any subject, you can look at it and you can use this framework of understanding the masculine and feminine dynamics at play, and it will explain to you basically exactly what's happening. So I've been putting together a lot of thoughts on this, and I need to sit down and like write them out or try to get them coherent somehow, so I can start talking about them. So basically there's like this never-ending flow of thought going on in my head, and it's kind of like the tram that's going by that you have to try to run and jump and get onto. So I'm trying to figure out the point at which I'm going to just drop in and then kind of run with it. So something like that's going to be coming here pretty soon. I've got some other business that I'm working on as well, separate from the show. So got to get working on that. But so you guys look forward to some kind of weird esoteric symbology stuff from me.
I like it. Adam, you got anything coming up with the show?
Yeah, well, so being looking forward to the wedding in a couple of weeks, I'm probably going to rehash some older episodes with either you guys or whatever other shows I've been on. But yeah, hopefully, I know you reached out to Father John Strickland, Buck. I did as well, so we'll probably be both having him on around the same time, talking about different subjects. So that should be a nice couple of shows that complement each other really well. One of the things that works for me as far as keeping my scattered brain intact is having guests, because it forces me to focus on that particular nugget of information for the week or week and a half before.
Same. Yep.
And then I can, go to the shelf with the, several dozen, maybe a couple dozen books I haven't read yet, and be like, okay, this one's relevant. And I have a context to put them in, rather than just kind of arbitrarily reading things all the time. It's easier to like keep up. So yeah, we'll have a couple of rehashed episodes, and then hopefully Father John, and then a couple surprises in store for August. So should be. I don't want to curse myself in any way by saying who they are, because then of course they're not going to come out and I'm going to look stupid. I do that well enough on my own.
Been there, done that. Yeah, indeed. And Twitter following. You don't love Twitter, but I know you're back on it. You're not Twitter following, Twitter handle.
Yeah, I mean, my handle everywhere is basically the age of _info.
Okay.
I am on Twitter. I'm on, I don't know, if I go on there if I have to message somebody. Like I went on to message someone who I wanted to invite on next month. And then while I was there, I scrolled for like 5 minutes, and then I haven't been on it in a week. So you can message me on that. Instagram's the age of _info, all the other apps. If I see a message pop up, I will log into the app, and otherwise I probably won't. You can see what you're doing. I'm on Facebook a couple times a day. Message me there is pretty good. Or adam@theageofinformation.com. Or YouTube comments are always helpful. We don't get nearly enough of those. Very, very thankful for the subscribers and views that we've gotten in the last 6 months. But I would love to see more engagement from people. Even if it's just a, hey, great job, or ask a question or something like that. That would be, and I love the same people that comment all the time, but there's so many people looking at it. I would like to know who you are. So if you're listening to the videos and you like the content, reach out or just say hi, or just let me know that you're a real person and not some kind of weird bot or something. The interaction is really what makes this all worth it. So
I even got a comment on YouTube. What the hell's up with the crappy intro music? And even that made me smile. Any interaction's fine.
It's like the best intro music on the internet, dude.
Yes.
Well,
this is not a trustworthy person.
Yeah, it's not for everyone. Matt, I forgot to ask you to plug anything you want social media wise.
Real Kingpilled basically everywhere. That's Real Kingpilled on Instagram, on Twitter. I gotta say, regarding Twitter, if you're getting rate limited on Twitter, you're not using the platform the right way.
That's a good point you made the other day.
If you have to read more than 600 tweets in a day, you're not using the platform the right way. You're not following the right people. You're spending too much time on there. You're not tweeting enough yourself. Yeah.
You're not using life the right way.
Right. Yeah.
I hate that stupid saying, go out and touch grass, because it's so cliche and cheesy, and usually annoying people say it. But if that's hurting you, the 600 tweets or whatever it was, go out and touch grass.
Maybe go out and touch trees or something.
Yeah, there you go.
But you can I haven't really shouted this out before, but I have no problem. Realkingpilled@gmail.com. If you want to send me something private, then I typically don't see. Both my Instagram and my Twitter are just absolutely, the DMs are just absolutely inundated with spam to where, I mean, I get 10 spam DMs a day, basically. So if you're trying to DM me there, I'm sorry, I probably won't see it. So you can send me an email, realkingpilled@gmail.com. So far, I haven't fallen to the spam monsters there.
Okay. And
Okay.
also, if anybody has negative things to say about me, you can also send it to realkingpilled@gmail.com.
Leave it on the comments on my YouTube page. Yeah, that spam section on Twitter, I told Julie, I showed her, I said, this isn't spam. Look how popular I am with women. So, it kind of keeps the ladies on their toes when they see that all of these Asian women like you. So on that note,
keeping it spicy.
Yeah. Thank you guys for
like
being
kimchi.
here. Thank you guys.
Thanks, fellas.
Thank you for listening to this discussion with my buddies, Adam Patrick and Matt Erickson. So next week, like I mentioned up top, Father John Strickland is the guest. We will go over the broad series, the broad messaging he's getting at in his 4-part series, Paradise and Utopia, the rise and fall of what the West once was. We start off with Christendom and what that meant and Pentecost, and we get all the way to current times and then the age of nihilism and where we're at now. We get into Nietzsche and fascism and communism, Western progressivism, liberalism, all of those things from the Orthodox perspective. It's a good interview. I think you guys are going to like it. And as for this show, counterflowpodcast.com. You can follow me. You know what? I need to give a special shout out, and I apologize for not hitting this sooner. Father Bob from a Carpatho-Russian church up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where I was at with Amy and Julie Mastrini, the beautiful twins. I was talking to him about these books, and he, lo and behold, he said, look, did you know the 4th part's out, The Age of Nihilism? And I did not know at the moment. And I immediately ordered it, read through it, and that was helpful for my interview with Father John Strickland that you will hear next week. So Father Bob, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And as for the rest of you guys, we'll see you next week, live Tuesday evening, 7 p.m. We'll talk then. Have a good one.
You get split in half, like on the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.